Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 7th episode of DECODE WORK. This is your host, Nadeem Khan, with yet another episode of DECODE HR. Today, we have a very special guest from Switzerland. Before I introduce her, I'd like to once again kind of give the concept of our show, our program, which is hosted on multiple channels. So you can catch us on YouTube, on our Facebook channel, or LinkedIn by subscribing to Nadeem Khan. So the concept of the show is to understand what is happening around work after the pandemic, and how leadership, work, culture, management, all of these have shifted from the very normal. So this is so understanding the now of work, which people used to call the future of work. So let me introduce our guest for today, Jennifer Jordan, who is an MS, MPhil, and PhD from Yale University. She's also a professor of leadership and organizational behavior at IMD in Switzerland. Prior to IMD, Jennifer was a fellow and associate professor in human resource management and organizational behavior at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and a lecturer at Kellogg's School of Management. So she has also been named as one of the top 40 MBA professors worldwide under the 40 years of age by Poets and Quants, and nominated as a Thinkers50 Radar Award. Okay, so let me invite Jennifer in. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Nadeem. Absolutely my pleasure. And you did a very good try at pronouncing Groningen. But you have to get the Dutch G down a little bit better. But it was close. It was close. And yeah, you're right. I was nominated for the Thinkers50 Award, but I didn't get it. So I'm a loser of the Thinkers50 Radar Award. But that sounds really bad to put on your bio. So let's keep it at nominated.
I think nominated. You're close to it when you're selected. So you know, if you're nominated. A lot of big actors, when they're nominated for a Grammy, they just say nominated. They never say won the award, but still, you know, being nominated is phenomenal itself.
That's true. And everyone actually calls these Thinkers50 Awards the Oscars of management. So it's like I've been, you know, hopefully I won't be, you know, who are some of the famous actors that have been nominated like 20 times but never actually won? Maybe that's going to be my career.
We wish you all the best. For the structure today, the structure is usually 30 minutes of us discussing. Anyone who has questions, feel free, whether you're watching this from LinkedIn, YouTube, or our Facebook channel, you can put the comments in. We will look at the comments, and please ask your questions around the whole, let's say, the theme for today is leadership in the digital era. We do understand, Jennifer, your work is basically it is a culmination of leadership in the digital era. Can you tell us something about the work that you've done, your research, and how you're passionate about, you know, what brought you here to Switzerland from the US?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I've gone on quite a detour. So it wasn't directly from the US here, but good question about why I'm interested in this topic. So, and by the way, I love how you say, we used to say the future work, and really it's the now work, because you're absolutely right. And one thing we talk about here at IMD, so I work at IMD, which is a business school in the southern part of Switzerland. And we say that in the last 3 months, we've seen more change within our own organization, but also within our clients than we've seen in the 3 years prior. Like, it was just such a level of accelerated change. And also seeing how humans and you know, we talk about agility, like what really is agility? We've had to be agile these last 3 months. But what brought me into this area? So I did my PhD and my master's and some postdoc work actually on the topic of wisdom. So what is wisdom? What makes people wise? And do we actually get more wise as we age? Pretty esoteric topic. And so because it was so kind of esoteric and difficult to publish in, and I wanted to go up the tenure track, I sort of abandoned that topic early on in my career and started looking more at just managerial decision making, which is related to wisdom. And if we think about, like, what is the managerial gut and intuition and all of that. But this topic of wisdom still, I think, fascinates me in one way or another. And certainly, it's one of the drivers for why I'm interested in leadership in the digital age, in a world that's driven by data, where everything should be data-based. And, you know, are you using big data and all these questions? Like, I'm really curious, do we need a wisdom anymore? Do we need the managerial intuition, or is that so full of biases and misinformation based on, you know, ancient history that it's no longer relevant? So I think for me, that's sort of where I've a long journey that I've taken. I left school in 2005. So it's been 15 years now. I've lived in the Netherlands, as you said, in Groningen, between then and Switzerland. I also spent some time in Germany. But that's sort of how I got here. But it was more that, like, in the last couple of years, clients were asking me. I do most of my research on power and managing the dynamics of power. They were asking me, well, how is this different in the time of digital transformation? And how do leaders actually run a transformation? And I didn't have answers. And I think one of the reasons you become a professor is you want to have answers. You want to seem like you know something. And so it was very uncomfortable for me to not know anything. So I had to start investigating this topic on my own and figuring out what is different in the digital age, and how do leaders, ideally, what are best practices around leading transformations?
So what exactly did you find out with this? Oh, and especially coming back, I think we had a sort of disruption. You know, we were talking about the digital age. We had like a sort of glitch with wisdom. What was your finding? Were you in the right path, or how does wisdom come? I'm really curious about that.
So if we look at our analytical intelligence, I went to graduate school to study with one of the foremost experts in human intelligence. And what's so depressing about human intelligence is it, like, sort of plateaus around our 20s, our mid-20s, and then it just slowly declines from around 50, early 50s till death. So, like, we don't get any more analytically intelligent after, like, our mid-20s, which I found so depressing. And so I wanted to believe that there was something that got better with age, at least up here, right? And the body doesn't get better either. So it's just like, you know, the romance of dying young might actually be true. So I was like, okay, there must be something that gets better as we age. And actually, the thesis that I came up with, and I have a chapter on this, is actually wisdom and age are not correlated, that people don't get wiser as they age. But what we do find is sort of the good grape hypothesis. Like, you know, some wines are not any better when they age, but if it's a really good grape, they do get better. And so there are certain characteristics of people, which, interestingly, I've never thought about this until just a second, are some of the same characteristics that make leaders good in the digital age. That if you have them, you actually do become wiser as you age. But those are the minority, not the majority. So the takeaway from that is it doesn't get any better for most of us. Yeah.
Okay. So a question, just as probably, you know, some people might be wondering, a lot of people confuse leadership and management the same thing. How do you categorize the difference between leadership and management in your research? On the onset, I think this is the elephant in the room kind of question.
Yeah, I know. So I don't really believe in elephants in the room. I'm from two low context cultures, America and the Netherlands. So if there's an elephant, I just talk about it. I would distinguish, I mean, there's a lot written by much smarter people than me on this topic. But I would say I distinguish management from leadership by vision. A manager is an executor. A leader has to have a vision that others execute. So that's how I distinguish the two.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And the characteristics that you were talking about, the characteristics that probably would get us closer to wisdom or make us more wiser. And I truly believe, you know, in my book, I've also written the highest form of intelligence is intuition. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this? And the characteristics that you were talking about, you know, for people to be more wiser in the digital age. Obviously, if we go back to, let's say, the Romans, or if we go back to the Egyptians, those times, obviously, they had some sort of technology or some sort of innovation that they were doing. So they would have been on the cutting edge of advancement that they were on. And similar goes for us as we are today, where, you know, we're seeing technology boom to the optimum. So what sort of characteristics do you feel in your research are necessary for leaders in the digital era?
And it's interesting you mentioned the Romans, because I think so much of what we know about wisdom was written by the Greeks and the Romans,
Yes.
mostly the Greeks,
Yes,
way before our time. And also, if you look at just the level of advancement of these societies, like we think we're so advanced, but if you look at the technology that was available to them, it is pales in comparison to now and what they were able to do. It's very humbling. And I mention humility and being humbling because that is actually one of the characteristics we find is very important for leaders in the digital age, to kind of know what you don't know. And that is one of the definitions, strangely, of wisdom, is knowing what you don't know. And so I think those things go hand in hand. And just why is that important? Why is it important to be humble? Because you see leaders that are not humble, that are not willing to know what they don't know, or curious to know what they don't know, and then to learn those things from others, tend to become very arrogant. And maybe they have a vision, but they're not necessarily open to adjusting that vision to new information or changes that might happen in their environment. So that competency of humility is both important for wisdom and leaders in the digital age. Also, you asked about wisdom. One thing that we saw was, and this was not my work, it was Paul Baltus's work, who was a psychologist. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he said one thing was relativism, sort of understanding that what is good for you and what is maybe a norm for you is not a norm for everyone. And I see this with leaders, definitely here at IMD. We have the privilege of working with many, many senior leaders. Many of them are from Generation X, maybe even baby boomers still, and also tend to be Caucasian and male. And so they'll say, oh, I would never use a robo-advisor for my investments. I still I would never trust a robot to tell me how to invest my money. Well, that might be true for you and someone in your income bracket, but is that true for Generation Z? And is that true for people that are living in conditions where they might not have a financial advisor that they would trust and go to their office face to face, right? So I think one of the predictors of wisdom that we knew over 20 years ago, which is relativism, and then understanding what does relativism truly mean, is also very important for leaders in the digital age. We term that competency in the digital age as being hyper awareness. Like, are you aware of not only your comfort zone and your immediate surroundings and your context, but are you also interested and curious, where the humility comes in, with others' comfort zones and others' reference points, etc.
So you've mentioned too humility, and you've mentioned understanding relativism, right?
Mm-hmm. Or hyper awareness, yeah.
And hyper awareness, like relativism and hyper awareness are the same one.
Like I sort of so relativism is the term from Paul Baltus, and hyper awareness is what we use now in our work. Yeah.
Okay. So having these two, any other characteristics or competencies that you feel that leaders should have?
Of course, I couldn't build a career on two, Nadeem. I have to have more. No, so we definitely So we mentioned vision, right? Managers are executors. Leaders have a vision that others execute. Being visionary is quite important. We find that's one of the biggest predictors, especially at the top of the hierarchy for success in leaders. Of do they have maybe not a clear plan, because things are always changing, but like, what do they want as an organization to look like in a year or 2 years or 3 years? So do they have a vision? What would that possibly look like? Then bringing other people in to help you execute and adapt that vision. That's really important. Another one is adaptability. Do you understand, for many years and there's a lot of evidence around charisma and influence, that we're more influenced by people that tell a very consistent story over and over again. But with the speed of change in which we are living right now, being able to be adaptable is extremely important. I mentioned hyper awareness. Another one is, are you a good listener? And that one is quite closely correlated with humility. So are you not listening to just respond? I mean, this is, everyone says, like, are you listening to respond? Are you listening to truly understand? And are you listening to diverse voices, not just people that are echo chambers of yourself? Then two more, are you able to use data in your decision making? So not only have a gut, but are you able to really understand how to use data? I think for leaders now that is really important. And maybe it's not, we can maybe talk about the role of intuition, but that is also quite important. And are you able to act quickly? I think one of the biggest impediments I see of leaders in the digital age, and even with COVID, is a commitment to perfectionism. So like not willing to put anything out there that isn't perfect. And I think some people have more trouble with this than others. But are you willing to work at speed and sacrifice perfectionism? Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do you feel that leaders should put speed and agility over perfection? That's what
Yes.
you mean to say.
In the digital age, yes, I think you have to. And I think, there's this philosophy of just act, which, or build, measure, learn. Even if we think about the lean startup model of, we're going to build something, a minimally viable product, something small. We're going to test and learn about what works, what doesn't, and then we're going to measure, and then we're going to learn from that, and then repeat the process over and over again. And I think the whole idea of that, or any kind of Scrum or agile working processes, are based on this idea of speed of action rather than perfection. So I think it's quite important. Yeah. Either I froze or you froze, Nadeem.
Amazing. So I think summing up this whole conversation we've had up till now, I can reflect to one of our philosophers who said. Can you hear me properly now?
Good. Now we're back.
Yeah, we're back. It's just we're talking about the.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a couple show this one. I hope that it shows. So Vikas Dua from India is asking, do you see empathy becoming more critical as a leadership trait in the new normal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so we looked at, when building this model, we gave a bunch of competency.
Did you get?
I did get the question, and it's from Vikas. Do you see empathy becoming more critical as a leadership trait in the new normal? Yes. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm going to keep talking. I think we've lost Nadeem again. But when we were building this model of leadership in the digital age, the competency model, we asked leaders, we asked about over 700 leaders to answer, actually over 1,000 now that I think of it, to answer a bunch of competency measurements. And we looked at then peer ratings of success in the workplace. And these were all workplaces that were digitally, had either were digitally disrupted workplaces or digital workplaces. And what we found is that we included in there emotional intelligence as one of the competencies, which within emotional intelligence, there is empathy, right? Are you able to understand the emotions of others and then to respond, which is another dimension of emotional intelligence, respond appropriately to that, to their situation. And so essentially that is empathy. And indeed, emotional intelligence was predictive of success. But what is interesting is that emotional intelligence has been a predictor of leadership success for over like 3 decades. So it's hard to say that empathy is more important than it was before in the digital age, because I think that it is always predictive of leadership, or it has always been predictive of leadership success. Now, I think a different question might be is the workplace less forgiving of the leaders who don't have empathy? And perhaps the answer is yes, because we've just become a more diverse workplace that is more emotionally in touch. And so I think that while it's always been important, maybe it is more of like what is known as a hygiene factor. Like, you have to have emotional intelligence nowadays. You can't get away without it as a leader. But I don't have any data on that. I'm just guessing. And by the way, I told Nadeem I'm drinking tea from Starbucks, but they are not sponsoring the show, so they are not a sponsor.
Okay, I just I'm sorry. He's
I can't hear you, Nadeem, so I'm going to read the question from Sahib. Hello, Sahib. Do you believe that future leaders need to be aware of their values and aligning their organizational values with that of their team or employees and the values that are aligned with human society? So I would say that beyond any competency, value alignment and being clear with values is so important. And this even has to do with, so I used to do relationship counseling, like couples, for a very short period of time, not as a professional because I was still a student at that time. And one thing, oops, I think you maybe lost me. But one thing that that is predictive of success as a couple, which is essentially a team, is values alignment. I mean, any psychologist could tell you that. And we also work with teams here, and what we often do is personality profiling and looking at overlap and like, where are you different as a team in personality, and where are you the same? And what we've actually I found to be even more within teams is value alignment over and above personality alignment, because values is really what, you might act on an outside level, but you have different cultures, you have different ways of growing up, you've had different exposure, you might act different in terms of your behavior. But if your values that are underlying it are the same and are linked, in that you sort of see the why we are doing what we are doing with the same language and the same understanding, that will help teams through so much. It will help them become more adaptable. It will help them to become more cooperative, to be more supportive of one another, to have that empathy, etc. So, so I think, yeah, the values is so important, is so critical. And just saying something like cooperation, like we really truly, and what does it mean to truly embody? Like I value cooperation more than I do competition. Saying something like that. It doesn't matter if you're from a I don't know at what point my mic got muted. But it doesn't matter if you are more extroverted or less extroverted. If you truly value cooperation, you're going to find ways to get past these individual differences to truly cooperate. So I think values are absolutely important, and there's a lot to be said about wisdom and values as well.
amazing. I think we've mentioned a similar concept in our research in our book. We've said the 3 P's of human resources. So the future of work, probably the people function, which we mention in our book, and we say profit, planet, profit, values aligned with these 3 are really, really important for the future of work. so having the three P's, people, obviously the people from both your employees and your customers, aligned to your planet, and your profit, obviously the needs of an organization to grow. I think that's what we mentioned. We're just constantly having this issue glitch. I'm not sure whether we're able to hear the audience properly, and whether they're able to hear us as well.
Well, we can only hope.
Jennifer, are you able to hear me properly?
I hear you now. Yes, there was a time when I wasn't able to hear you.
Yep. Okay. Okay. With one thing I'd like to ask you around the culture which is reshaping because of digital transformation, and the role of leadership that is evolving and shifting. How do you think, or how do you feel, or what your research says around there's in my studies, my understanding of leadership is that leadership creates culture, right? You've talked about the vision, but leaders create the culture by giving the resources for, let's say, managers to be able to mobilize those resources and get to an action area, which is probably strategy implementation, right? So what do you think will change now, because leaders are not interacting the way they used to, culture is not developed the way it used to? So what's the change, and how can people equip themselves to this new leadership age in the digital era? That would be our concluding question.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that leaders can, what's happening when a leader goes virtual, or a leader's team goes virtual, is that the ability to micromanage goes out the door, right? You can't be watching what everyone's doing when they're at home. And that's both if you're someone who really is good at empowerment, Nadeem and I were talking about empowerment before I went on. If you're good at empowerment and you're comfortable with that and you don't feel threatened by it, that makes a great world for you, because I think you can, let people go off. If their comfort zone is at home, they can work at home. If their comfort zone, is in a field somewhere, they can work in a field. And it's good for everyone. If you're someone who is a micromanager and really insecure and needs to watch everything and is a perfectionist, then this is like a nightmare, right, to be in this scenario. What I would say is that leaders can create culture, and I actually disagree with you. I don't think leaders always create culture. Sometimes, depending on where the organization is in its evolution, leaders need to simply carry on an existing culture and maybe evolve it a little bit, but not necessarily recreate it. And in order to do that in the virtual world, I think having these, you talked about values, right? That's the first question. Do we have these shared values? So that I know if I don't see you for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, whatever days because of COVID or whatever other reasons, we work virtually regularly, do I know that you're still working under the values that we share or that we espouse here at the organization? And so I think that the values have to be the foundation. And the question is then, how do we show those values in our behavior, which is essentially culture? Let's say, I'm going to keep using the value of cooperation just because it's easy. Let's say that cooperation is truly a value. How do we exercise cooperation in the virtual world? Are we going to make sure that we have some kind of like a Slack work line so that we can ensure that if we finish something early, we can step in and help a colleague on a task? Is that what we mean by cooperation? Or do we mean cooperation by, sharing all of our successes that week or our struggles that week, and finding out, oh, how can I learn from my colleague Tom's successes, but maybe help Judy on some of her weaknesses that she's having this week? So I think the role of a leader is to not only align people on those values and get them to really embody the values as a shared group, but also to say, what do these values mean in action? What are the behaviors that we as a team need to espouse and need to demonstrate in order to carry out these values? Yeah.
Amazing, amazing.
I'm wondering if I should do like a little tap dance while I wait for
Okay,
Nadeem to
so
come back.
we've also mentioned something similar, which is where leadership comes in, and I'm calling. my, are we back to normal now?
For the second, yes.
I can't figure out.
Good, I think. Anyone would like me to sing a song or do a dance while we're waiting? I'm happy to entertain you.
I think we're going the technology is just taking over.
No worries. One of the challenges of working in the digital age is just technology, even in 2020 when this should all work.
This should all work. Yeah, I made a last time glitch that I've just it's just gone worse since last time. We're experiencing trouble with the whole digital with this whole thing. I'd like to conclude our session. I hope that we've been able to provide value with all the disruption that's happening, but this is the now work. We have to deal with it, and you've rightly mentioned a lot that needs to change. Probably first is being more agile, and the traits or the competencies that leadership needs to have around this. My kind of take on this is that we need to look at any organization in three dimensions: digital, data, and design, and leadership and culture comes in the center of this. So I think you've rightly mentioned leadership will be the one that is looking at all of these three dimensions and taking them forward. I would like to ask you one of the last questions, which is how can people get in touch with you? Would LinkedIn be the best platform to get in touch with you? And your research or any other areas you would like us to point to, that would be my last.
So LinkedIn is a great way. And Nadeem, I have to say, you send me a message on LinkedIn, it sometimes takes me a while to respond just because I don't, I think that's one of the challenges for leaders in the digital age. We have so many sources of input of managing WhatsApp and email and the phone and the SMS and Facebook Messenger. And so I think sometimes messages get lost in the fray. So please be patient if you send me a message. But the good part about LinkedIn is I do post any new articles, both my own research, but also others that I think are really strong in the area. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. This was a pleasure. It was a pity that, if we're talking about leadership in the digital age, digital didn't really cooperate with us today, but that's life. And I think can you build, measure, and learn, that is all about what it means to be a leader today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone who joined us in the session. I'd like to apologize for any delay or disruption that may be caused during the session, and my apologies to you, Jennifer, as well, because of the disruption. Not sure why it's constantly happening now. So for the audience, this is our 7th episode. We end on the 9th episode for the season. Stay tuned every Thursday, same time, with your host, myself, Nadeem Khan, and a new guest in the next. Do let me know what type of content you would like to hear. Any feedback for the speaker. You can reach out to speakers such as Jennifer yourself and give them feedback, or give me feedback, and then we can roll it out and let people know whether you're enjoying the show. And that also gives us motivation to keep moving forward. Thank you once again. Thank you everyone for your time, and we hope